everybody. Such a good day. Such a nice day. Wonderful to be here. Broadcasting live from Toronto, where it was a balmy 18 degrees when I walked outside this morning. We're all over the place. We're in Quebec, maybe. It depends on where David Wallace says he is. Doesn't really matter. I don't know where he is. We might be in Quebec today. I know we're in Alberta today, where it snowed like all week, and it's like minus 16 right now. So we've got a big show for you today. Really excited that everybody's here. What happens is when you get into these podcasts, you get into these discussions, tech tends to decide whether or not you're allowed to have the discussion. And tech is widely influenced by the ethics of the people who complain all the bleeping time. So what we have today is an interesting program for you here on the Dean Blundell Show, featuring some people that I know, featuring people that I've met, featuring people I have not met, with diametrically opposed positions to a whole bunch of different shit. And it gives me great pleasure to bring everybody together today. Please welcome back to the program the lead columnist for the National Observer, Mr. Max Fawcett. Max, nice to see you. Your hair is on point. You look great today.
Thank you so much. My son and I got the same haircut, so we're both very happy with it.
You got matching cuts?
We got matching cuts. It was the first time he didn't cry when he went to the whatever they call a kid's hairdresser. So yeah, very, very big milestone.
Oh, it's a big day for you. You didn't freak out. Did you both sit in one of those cool race cars at Melonheads?
No, I took him to my Italian barber, which he's.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So Italian barber. Hey, can you do me a favor and just switch over to Google Chrome, if that's okay? Switch over to Google Chrome before we get this thing started.
I don't have it on my stupid.
Oh, you don't?
MacBook or whatever this.
Oh, okay.
Apple.
Do you have a different? Yeah. Do you have a different browser? Yeah. Yeah, it just doesn't work really well with the API. No problem. Yeah. We will. We'll put you in there. There's David. And anyway, Max Fawcett's going to join us coming up in a couple minutes when we get his tech all figured out. Also, welcome to the program, Mr. David Wallace, former fixer for the Conservative Party. You may know him from the series on Canada Land called Rat Fucker, which is one of my all-time favorite titles for a podcast series. If you remember from Canada Land, and David's here, and he set up this incredible interview with a gentleman, another David, from Alberta, who's been called an extremist. He's been called a million names. And there are a lot of people out there that get really pissed off when this gentleman is on a podcast, and I don't really give a shit because if we're going to shake things up, we're going to shake things up with conversations. Please welcome to the program, David Parker, the chief executive from Take Back Alberta. How do you guys know each other before we bring Max back into the program? David, how did you meet David? How did the two Davids meet?
Well, David Wallace was on Twitter calling me out as a coward, saying that I wouldn't come on a show and that Max Fawcett would. And I responded saying, let's do it. And I've heard about the Rat Fucker podcast, and I believe we have a few enemies that are the same, including the Hallmans. So we actually ended up maybe not being quite as antagonistic as people would think after we realized that we might align on more things than we thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is, what conversations are for, right? And not necessarily Twitter. We sit and launch things at each other on Twitter.
I like to think of Twitter as the Thunderdome, right? Twitter's the Coliseum. Twitter's where we go and we do battle with one another. But, even gladiators can be friends offline.
Yeah, well, you try to be. I mean, we don't live in that society anymore where people who have diametrically opposed positions in life or different values can sit down and ham it up, chop it up, and say, hey, let's have a conversation about you. Let's have a conversation about me. And let's go from there. Instead, you get called hateful ideologue. You get called an extremist. I get called a libtard or a cuck on a semi-regular basis. Pedo and groomer is my favorite, too. It's lost all its juice. All of it, David.
That's what I mean, the argument has become very all of society has become polarized, right?
Yeah.
And as this polarization continues, it can only really lead to one thing, which is violence. So my hope is that we choose democracy over violence, and that's kind of what I'm advocating.
Okay, and from my understanding, I'm just going to check in on Max here. So Max, you give me a thumbs up if you're good to go. You're good to go? Okay. No, you're not good to go. He's got the thumbs down. I'm going to wait for Max. We're going to wait for Max and bring him in. We got some tech issues. My fault. But that's what we're here to talk about, right? Like, democracies themselves are established on the back of conversations, positions, influence. And what happens today is the opposite of what democracy is in my mind and what I grew up in, which is, hey, we all had crazy friends when we grew up that we assumed they were crazy because they had a different position in life. They maybe had a different set of values or virtues. And you just kind of accepted that that's who they were, and you still had the ability to be their friend. We don't have that anymore in this society, right? It doesn't feel like it is. And I know when we look on Twitter and we sit and launch shit at each other all day long, we're in this position of being able to influence different people's ideologies. So whatever those ideologies are, you take that side. And, we only see the worst of the worst on Twitter. And what I want to get to today, Max is back. You there, Max? We got you.
I'm here. Yeah.
Oh, dude, you're so good now. You're nice and clear. What I want to do is talk about you guys. David was the guy that brought this thing together. How did you guys start sniping at each other? Max, why don't we start with you? Like, how do you know David? When did he come to I love it? We're going to get started. Parker's laughing already. How do you feel about each other? Max, you go ahead. Get started.
I mean, I couldn't tell you what the original sin, the original tweet was here that got everything started. But obviously, David's antipathy towards vaccines and sort of politics around the pandemic were diametrically opposed to mine. And then as he grew in influence and power within the UCP, he obviously came to my attention. And look, fair play to him. He was willing to engage on Twitter in a way that a lot of people involved in that party maybe aren't. He gets his gloves up, I would say, often much too high, but he's willing to play. And so that's part of the reason why I'm on Twitter. And so I think we just kind of got into this back and forth dynamic. I'm sure, like so many things, it's one of those situations where, look, we wouldn't agree on very much other than disliking the Hallmans. I'm in on that one as well. But people are more civil in real life. They're more civil even over these sorts of digital forums where they can see each other's eyeballs. Twitter takes everyone's sort of natural asshole quotient, and I think jacks it up by about 200%. So him and I are probably both natural assholes to begin with, and so it just sort of I think flowed from there. But what do we disagree on? Just about everything, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that here.
You know what you don't disagree on? Beards.
It's true.
You guys both have incredible beards. Facial hair.
I have to say his has definitely got the the more distinguished look. I've got the semi-homeless look, but yes.
David, what Max said, fair comment? Is he
yeah, I think he's probably right. I tend to, and this is actually a bit to my own shame, but I tend to be a little bit more aggressive on Twitter. Twitter, rewards aggression, right? It rewards being very vocal and being very strong in your convictions. And I find personally that there's a lot of insults coming the way of the conservative movement. I'm sure people on the other side feel exactly the same way. I don't see a lot of voices on the particularly United Conservative side, but in general on Twitter that are willing to punch back. And I've just always been the kind of person who never shied away from a fight. I enjoy conflict. I enjoy arguments. So I think that Max is probably one of those people, and I do see him as someone who I have engaged with in that way. I agree with him. I don't think we agree on almost anything, but I think that's probably why we tend to go at each other on Twitter as much as we do.
So just to point out, you guys have been sniping at each other for a couple of months on Twitter. You just agreed on two really basic principles of a conversation here. So, hey, we won already.
Well, there we go. People will be so disappointed.
Yeah. Max, do you think David Parker's an extremist?
I think he holds views that are definitely on the extreme side of the ledger. I think when you're referring to Alberta Health Services as having a communist ideology, when you're going after educated people and expertise in the way that he does, I think that's beyond the bounds of traditional political discourse. And I think it is the sort of thing that we have been seeing in the United States ever since Trump came on the scene, this sort of insult comic style political discourse. And it's corrosive to I think the bonds of society, which David may or may not be that interested in, and just corrosive to our ability to have conversations with people that we disagree with. I mean, we need to find a place where we can talk to people who we have different ideas about things without hating them and without wanting to blast them in the face. And I'm not sure that it's a good idea to be telling people on Twitter that folks at AHS have an evil communist ideology, because there's lots of people on social media, and I hate to say, I think especially in David's follower group, that might be inclined to run with that in a way that I hope anyone would want to see happen. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the folks at AHS, the folks who say things about vaccines and masks that maybe he doesn't like, they are at the end of the day trying to help the largest number of people. They are trying to look out for our best interests, to protect the common welfare of this thing we call society. And it bums me out. It makes me quite sort of depressed about where things are, when we can't even kind of set that stuff aside and say, we can agree that maybe we don't fully endorse or support the measures they're taking, but we at least know they're coming from a good place. And I'm not even sure that we can get that concession out of David here.
David?
Well, I would agree. I don't think that I would concede that AHS is coming from a good place. I think that many of the frontline workers, the doctors, the nurses, the nurse practitioners, people who are on the front lines helping people, yes, I would agree. I do think they're coming from a good place. I do not believe that the leadership of AHS is coming from a good place. I feel that they are ideologues. It's becoming increasingly obvious that they are ideologically captured by a worldview that I diametrically oppose. I do not believe that the socialization of medicine in the way that they have done it has been beneficial. I think if you look at just the raw facts, AHS spends twice as much money per capita as NHS with worse outcomes. So maybe they do have good hearts. I can't judge a person's heart. I can only judge the outcomes of their actions, and the outcomes of AHS's actions are a poorly managed healthcare system that has become draconian, that is using its power to suppress the free speech of doctors. It is using its power to crush the general health of the public. I do not think that the leadership of AHS has the best interest of people in mind, even if they might think that in their heart. They've been ideologically captured.
So you don't think that doctors should be like doctors who with medical degrees, immunologists, infectious disease experts should be telling citizens what they should be doing in terms of mitigating risk in a pandemic?
I do not believe that they should have the powers that they did. And now what we're seeing is the democratic will of Albertans, whether from the general election that we just went through or even just the internal party elections that have occurred that have brought Danielle Smith to power. Obviously, the people of Alberta have a very different view than the leadership of AHS, and they're not listening to that view. They are not listening to the will of the people. They are listening to their own ideology, which I would argue, and I think there's a lot of evidence, isn't working, isn't increasing people's health. But I think even if we take away the pandemic and just look at the results, the fact that we're spending twice as much money as the UK spends per capita on their citizens with worse outcomes is just evidence that they're also incompetent. So whether they're experts or not is irrelevant to me. Their outcomes are incompetence.
Yeah, well, I think you could probably make that argument that generally speaking, healthcare is in the shitter across this country, right? For a variety of reasons. And it's easy to cast doubt on experts around an industry that has, big pharma taking people for a ride on a daily basis. It's easy to cast doubt on it, but I want to dig into the intention of what hides behind or what is behind your interest in the is it fair for me to call the continual sewering of medical experts and their opinions?
I don't think that's fair. I actually respect a lot of medical experts, but AHS is not made up of medical experts. It's made up of bureaucratic experts. And what I am opposed to is the centralization of power. AHS is a perfect example of the centralization of power. I believe all corruption comes from the centralization of power. AHS used to be a regional boards that would govern their regions. Then they centralized everything under one agency. Now we're seeing worse outcomes because it isn't actually the medical experts that run AHS. It is bureaucratic experts. And the iron law of bureaucracy, for those of your listeners who don't know, is that eventually a bureaucracy's purpose becomes to perpetuate the bureaucracy. And that's what we see in AHS. We see a centralization of power, which I personally believe to be the source of evil. I think all of the worst things that have ever been done in human history have been done through the centralization of power, whether that's communism, fascism, whatever it is. Those things have always been the government having more power. So my basic belief, if you want to boil it down to first principles, is that power needs to be decentralized. And AHS is the centralization of power. Therefore, I see AHS as the enemy because it's antithetical to my belief system.
Do you believe they're commies, though? Hang on just one second. Do you believe they're commies?
They're a single payer, single provider system. It's a monopoly. Of course they're commies.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Oh, commies. Max, go ahead.
Well, I think it's interesting that David is comparing Alberta to the UK's NHS. The NHS is one of the most heavily centralized public healthcare systems in the world. I mean, it is sort of renowned for the fact that it is a, government-run, government-operated, out of London, centralized system. And the reason why it works, the reason why it delivers lower per capita costs than Canada is because it has economies of scale, right? It's not a patchwork of provincial systems. It's one national federal, it's a national government with a national health system. It's right in the name. And it delivers those outcomes because of that centralization. So I just think there's an interesting disconnect there.
Well, actually, I think it delivers that because there's a parallel private system that takes pressure off of the system, also provides better incomes for doctors because they can go into the private system to make extra money, and then they can also do the public system. So if you're advocating for having a private and public parallel system, I couldn't agree more. That is what they do in the UK. That's what they do in most of the world. And I think that would be a great benefit.
We just agreed again. I just want to point that out.
Like the fact that you're comparing NHS to our broken Canadian system, I think furthers my point, which is we should have more optionality in healthcare, and the communist, frankly, single payer, single provider system that we have under AHS, we already know is inefficient. It's not providing the level of care that NHS is, and it doesn't provide any optionality for people who would like to get a hip surgery in shorter than 18 months.
Well, two things. I mean, we have private healthcare service delivery in Alberta. What David wants is more of it. So, if we're talking about Alberta being broken and we already have private healthcare service delivery here, there's kind of a bit of a disconnect there. And when he talks about optionality is a fun word. It sounds really neutral. But what optionality really means is that rich people get to pay to go to the front of the line, and the rest of us have to queue behind them. And if that's what people want, if that's what they want to vote for, fill their boots. I think, a democracy, people should have their choices laid out for them, and then they get to make their decisions. But let's not call it something that it isn't. It's not optionality. It's giving people the ability to use their money to purchase healthcare services that other people can't afford.
Well, I mean, if you're opposed to the system that the rest of the world uses, that's fine. You're welcome to that. But what you're proposing and what you're supporting is incompetence, because what happens when you have only one provider and one seller of a service is that you have no competition and therefore no accountability. And that's what we have with AHS, is no accountability. There's no way to hold AHS accountable because it's just one centralized bureaucracy with no competition.
So if you check my work, I've always supported private involvement in the healthcare system in Canada. I've thought that our willingness to make public only delivery at the battle line is a mistake. If you look at Europe, if you look at the rest of the world, they have hybrid systems. But let's not ignore the fact that the best healthcare systems in the world have a robust public payer and a public participant in that system. I'm also interested in one quick thing. I just want to circle back, David. You said that your first principles, your core belief is that all power should be decentralized. So given that, do you support the decentralization of power to cities and municipalities from the province? Do you think that the UCP should be devolving taxation powers to the local governments?
Yes.
Great. We agree on something else.
And I believe that a school board should have significantly more power, and that the Ministry of Education should have significantly less.
You guys, okay, that's 5 things you agree on, which is wild. But let's get to that, because grassroots, that's what people call you. You're this grassroots guy. David Parker is the CEO of Take Back Alberta. Is that
executive director? But
executive director of Take Back Alberta. You've been involved in politics for a long time. If I read your bio correctly, you spent a good decade in Ottawa working for Stephen Harper, if I'm not mistaken.
Only 1 year for Stephen Harper, but Ron Ambrose, Shelley Glover, Ed Fast, that whole crew.
Yeah. Right. So intensely familiar with conservatives, the Conservative Party of Canada, people that you've worked with. You and I had a chat prior to going on the air. We talked about democracy. We talked about the institutions being old, slow, stupid, and corrupt, which I truly do believe is the case. I believe Liberal Party, Conservative Party, to a funny extent, the NDP Party. I mean, it's just hilarious to me. I don't know why. They're just kind of there like a scab, but that's just how I feel. These are businesses that have had the pleasure of kettling us for hundreds of years, right? Taking our money, taking our time, gaslighting us on a daily, weekly basis for access to our tax bank card, for the benefit of their relationships. And you and I actually agreed off the air, and Max, this might please you or displease you, the fact that there has to be a shock to the system when it comes to some kind of democratic process that asks for more from the institutions that have continually kept us under their foot, that have continued. And man, this has been going on for 200 years. We're seeing the end result of that. And I believe that to be true, even though I have a completely different value system to David Parker. But what interests me when it comes to the Conservative Party of Canada, when it comes to the UCP, and when it comes to the grassroots movement to Take Back Alberta, is how it is steeped in faith. It is steeped in the idea that somehow evangelical Christianity is very, very important to the movement. It's Christian conservatism, and that's my bugaboo. That's where I come at this from, which is like, I'm hearing you talk about not trusting health professionals. I'm hearing you talk about, the institutions, and I'm hearing you talking about shaking it up. But I also see you advocating for religious conservatism in that party, and I don't know what your ideology is. I don't know what your background is. I know you're the son of a pastor. I know that you have faith-based leanings in your ideas and faith-based, with Christianity, evangelical Christianity. I grew up in Alberta. I went to an evangelical high school in Three Hills, Alberta. I am what you call apostate. So I understand where you're coming from, and I also want to know what's behind that door. And when you talk about not trusting health sciences, that fits everything I learned from my Christian faith upbringing. It is not real. Science isn't to be trusted. And I want to know where you're at with the vaccine. What drives your decision to amp up rhetoric against vaccines, amp up rhetoric against healthcare, being responsible for the people and having that power because they are experts? Is it the fact you understand the science, or is it your upbringing, your ideology? That's my question to you.
So, in terms of my faith, I am a Christian. I do believe in the saving power of Jesus Christ. I 100%. I'm not going to apologize for that. I have many, but in terms of Take Back Alberta, it's not a Christian organization. We have atheists, we have Sikhs, we have Muslims, we have Jewish people involved. It's a very multi-faith, it's just multi-belief system. The belief system of Take Back Alberta, although it is characterized as a Christian organization, it actually isn't. My friend Ranjit is very Sikh. I love talking to him about his Sikhism. He's bringing in huge amounts of Sikhs into our organization. My friend Mahmood, he's a very strong Muslim, a Sunni Muslim, very deep in his faith, and we get along very well. So it isn't a Christian organization, although I am myself a Christian. It's not a faith-based organization, although I do think that we tend to attract people who believe in God versus those who don't believe in God. What in terms of what our goal is, it actually isn't. It doesn't have anything to do with our faith directly. It has to do with a belief that freedom is fundamental and that God gives us freedom. That isn't something that the state gives us or our fellow citizens give us. It's given to us by the Creator. And many of my First Nations friends feel the same way. In fact, if you stack it up, people who believe in a creator versus people who don't believe in a creator, one stack's going to be a lot smaller than the other. That's very common, and throughout human history, people have believed in God, and most Canadians believe in God. The kind of God they believe in is different, but most Canadians do believe in a God. What my ideology is this, and it comes back to my Christianity. Christianity, Jesus gives humanity a choice. He gives them freedom. He doesn't demand that you believe in God. He says you can believe in me or you don't believe in me. That you could choose your way. And similarly, I believe that's the foundation of what a government should do. It shouldn't demand things of its citizens. It shouldn't force things of its citizens. It should give them freedom to make decisions. Now, there's the harm principle that John Stuart Mill came up with, and that's been perverted and turned into this weird idea that there's things called hate speech and that there's microaggressions, and all that's garbage. But the harm principle does apply. You are free as long as you're not doing direct harm to others. Now, we have in society the problem of our definition of harm is problematic. But fundamentally, I believe God gives us freedom. I believe he gave me freedom. And I believe that the state doesn't have the right to take that freedom away. And that's the foundation of Take Back Alberta, is the people should have freedom. And the people should have freedom to make their own decisions. So
you believe that you're God-given freedom and you are under the governance of your Lord, and that usurps any governance of the state, it usurps any social rules, responsibility. Is that what you believe?
I believe our God-given rights are given by God, not the state. Yes.
Okay. So is part of this then your because what you describe when you talk about Sikhs, when you talk about Muslims, you talked about basically Abrahamic faiths, right? Everything.
Well, the Sikhs are a little bit different, but yes.
Yeah, Abrahamic. So it is faith-based, just not the same faith.
No, because we also have atheists in our organization who don't believe in any God, but do believe in freedom. So the fundamental first principle is freedom.
First principle is freedom. What lines up behind that, which is freedom from, the rules of the state, government tyranny. Okay, good.
Yeah.
And you believe the vaccine and the mandates to get people vaccinated, you believe that was tyrannical? Do you believe it was tyrannical according to the interference in your God-given right to exist or continue to exist outside the rules of the state? Or do you believe it is because this is a big thing in the Christian community? I have a reverend brother. I grew up in this stuff. Do you believe the vaccine held the mark of the beast and canceled out your ticket to heaven? That's another thing.
No, I don't believe that. No. Here's what my beliefs around the vaccine have evolved over time as evidence has changed. But what I would say is, no matter what, and we see this in the Nuremberg Code, forcing a medical experiment on someone is illegal according to both the laws of man and the laws of God. Forcing something onto another human being against their will when it comes to their own bodies is wrong. And I think that a lot of pro-choice people would absolutely agree when it comes to a woman's body, but suddenly disagree when it comes to everybody else's body, which is hilarious to me. But the truth of the matter, the 100% truth of this is the government does not have the right, I believe, to force medical experiments on people. And that's what this was. You cannot argue that this was not a medical experiment. It did not have the length of time traditionally necessary to prove the safety of a vaccine. So number one, the government should not have that right. Number two, to answer your question, I actually do believe that the vaccine has caused more harm than good. I think the evidence is pretty clear on that now. And I think the fact that people are just not taking the vaccine, people are not taking it.
It's not.
People aren't taking it.
No offense, David. Look, I don't see any degrees on your wall, and you don't see any medical degrees on my wall. And you didn't come with some studies to back up the fact that you said it's pretty clear that vaccines have done more harm than good, because it absolutely, according to every peer-reviewed study, every single one, every university study, that vaccines work. Yeah, no, but my point is this: is that I don't want to get into the efficacy argument here with you, because again, it doesn't say MD on any of these things I got behind me.
But what I'd say to you, Dean, on that point is, the first point remains, even if we disagree on the second. And the first point is the government should not have the right to coerce its citizens into taking a medical experiment.
Max,
I'm just curious. Let's imagine that David is the prime minister. It's 2020, and health experts come to him and say, we have this vaccine for this virus that we really don't know a lot about the virus. We don't know how bad it is. We don't. It could be terrible. It could be tremendously lethal. But we've come up with this vaccine that we really think is safe. But we don't have the time to run the full clinical trials. That will take an additional 2 years. At which point, who knows how many more people will die. What would you do in that situation, David? Would you say, no, we got to wait for the clinical trials. We got to wait the full 2 years? Or would you say, you know what, we have enough evidence to proceed on this basis and we'll monitor it accordingly?
I would say give people the choice. If people want the vaccine, they can take the vaccine. If they don't want the vaccine, they shouldn't have to take the vaccine.
which is exactly what happened, of course.
No,
right?
no, that is not what happened.
Nobody
If I can jump in, guys, that's
Yeah.
not what happened. What happened was very much different. People weren't given any choice. I have a very good friend in the city of Barrie on their maintenance department. He didn't want to take the vaccine. Personal choice. He had a gun held to his head that if he didn't take the vaccine, he would lose his job. So he took the vaccine. He suffered a stroke 3 days later. Now, is it related to the vaccine? I'm not a doctor. Who's to say? But what's certain of is that individual, he hadn't taken the vaccine and would not have taken the vaccine if he did not face extortions from his workplace. Legislating someone into taking something that's helped is always a go because it creates dissension and wedge issue, and it was needlessly done. And trying to rush a vaccine into production, and it wasn't in 2020. Somebody came to him, actually, it was 2017, because in 2018, signs were ordered for social distancing. Information on that was Klondike Papers. So what I'm saying is,
Yeah, don't hold it, David.
Is it
In
full
2018?
2018, they were doing social distancing already.
they were printing up labels. Do you think the labels popped up just out of nowhere?
Do you have
this,
receipts for that, David? Hang on. Do you have receipts for the printing of pre-vaccine labels to tell people to social distance? Because that's important.
Talk to
We
Jacobson
can't launch. I know, but we can't launch that stuff in this podcast. Like, I get what you're saying. Like,
what I am saying is, Dean.
But
Dean.
Well, I need to see the receipts for it. Like, if we're going to talk about
What
that,
I am
talk about
saying
social responsible stuff, I got to see it.
Another point which we do have receipts for is when we were at a bottleneck during the pandemic and we couldn't get vaccines, they were offered to the government directly from Pfizer Switzerland, and they were turned down because it wouldn't go through a liberal third party. Now, that is a little bit dicey, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. I think this was a business. Did people get saved? Absolutely. But I think looking at the science, if we were going to see the deaths that were broadcast, to predict it, in those numbers, we really had to. I think it would have been a personal choice. I think legislating mandatory vaccines, I do believe that it is something that is an overreach by any government.
But let's go back to Max's point.
Let me bring Max in too, because he's been shut out in the cold, and I want to get his thoughts because I'm watching the wheels turn. Max, go ahead. I want your thoughts on that.
Well, so this is like a textbook example of the paradox of prevention, right? We take a course of action, a benefit occurs, people assume that benefit is baked into any course of action we would have taken, and they focus on the negatives of that course of action, the side effects. And we see this in all sorts of cases where public health is involved, where we do something, a good happens, and people kind of take that good for granted. We have no idea how many lives were saved because the vaccine mandate forced people like your friend who didn't want to get vaccinated to get vaccinated. Then they either didn't get COVID or they got COVID and it was a much milder version. In the other timeline where there was no vaccine mandate, they might have died. We don't know that. We don't have that information.
That's a counterfactual.
That's the paradox of prevention. So, and no,
that's a logical fallacy.
It's a paradox of prevention. You can go look it up. I've written a whole article about it. So, the idea that we only focus on the negative externalities here and not of the other path, it isn't logical. I'm willing to acknowledge that the mandates probably hung around too long. They probably didn't keep track or keep pace with the science as it was evolving. But the extent to which we discount our obligation to our fellow citizen here, and it's only about what we want. It's only about the things that are important to us, the things that matter to us, and not the things that matter to us as a common people, as a society, is just one of the big frustrations of the whole pandemic experience. There's this sort of almost childish selfishness where it's just about me, and not about what about the guy down the street who doesn't have an immune system that can protect him from this. There's no consideration given to him. It's the folks who are getting upset because hospitals are starting to mandate masks again. It's not about you when you're in the hospital. It's about all the other people that you're sharing that hospital with, and your personal freedom, your liberties are not the most important thing in that moment.
Do you agree, disagree, David?
I don't think that there's anything more important than people, because the ultimate destruction of human flourishing is government overreach. The worst things that have happened, let's take residential schools, for example, where people's children were taken from them by the government. Let's take the Nazis slaughtering the Jews. Let's take Mao's Cultural Revolution. Let's take Stalin's slaughter of the Georgians. It's always the same perpetrator. Government.
Yeah, but isn't that?
Government
Yeah, I know
is the
that.
enemy.
But isn't there?
Government is the enemy.
I know, but isn't there? Well, and that's easy. I mean, everybody hates the government. Like, it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right, and you want a friend, and you want to say, "Hey, do you trust the government?" They're going to say no. But
what Max is saying is we need to trust that the government is making good decisions for us. I don't trust the government, and my people don't trust the government. I don't think they should, because I think if you have even a tiny understanding of history, government is the enemy.
Yeah. Well, in a lot of cases, it is. Authoritarian governments are.
And so why should I sit
you're
here?
talking. Hang on. You're talking about the false equivalent here. You're talking about Chairman Mao. You're talking about the Holocaust. You're talking about and what we're talking about here is a vaccine. We're not talking about like murdering people because of their religious upbringing. We're not talking about.
We're talking about the government forcing people
exterminating.
to do something. We're talking about the government forcing people to do something, and I don't.
Well, the
think
government
I don't
forces
trust
you to
the
get a
government do
driver's
that.
license. Do you think you should be allowed to drive without a driver's license?
I mean, I don't really care one way or the other on that. That's not injecting something into my
Do you
body.
think? Okay. Well, do you think a restaurant should have to have like a license from the local health authority? Because Alberta went through a really unique experience where some unlicensed daycares made some children very, very, very sick.
Yeah, Ken Terr is a bad man. Liberals tend to be bad people, and Ken Terr was
there you go. You're
in
going
charge
for it.
of that. So.
It's nothing to do with that.
Yeah, he was the one that
regulation.
oversaw that.
But what you're saying is
was the one that
regulation from
oversaw
the
that.
government. Just because it's from the government means it shouldn't be regulated, and we shouldn't trust anybody. And that's something you harp on all the time, David.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that government overregulates everything, and I don't think it provides the safety that they claim it does. They use to take power away from the citizens.
Max?
Well, I think it's interesting that David's examples of government overreach all are, from 50 to 100 years old and more. I certainly wouldn't suggest trusting Nazi Germany or Mao's China in terms of government, but I think educated and informed people can make a distinction between Maoist China, Hitler's Germany, and contemporary Canada or contemporary Western society. Like, there's fundamentally different things here, but what it comes down to, I think, at the end of the day, is trust, right? I trust experts. I trust institutions. They're not perfect, but I trust them. People like David do not trust institutions. They do not trust experts. They do not trust other people in society to have their best interests at heart. And so they act as though those people don't have their best interests at heart. Why would I get a vaccine? Because that other person's probably not going to get a vaccine to take care of me. There's no sort of social capital there. There's no sense that we have a common purpose and we have common welfare. It is just sort of this worldview where everyone is kind of their own free agent. They're out to maximize their freedom and maximize their self-interest. I don't really understand how that aligns with his Christian worldview, to be honest with you. I feel like I'm probably the more Christian here in terms of what I'm expressing. But it's just, I think that is the thing that was most striking about the pandemic to me, was just the level of selfishness. And I wasn't raised to be a selfish person.
David?
Well, to that point, you're right. We're not in communist China or in Nazi Germany yet, but what happened, the point of the argument is government, when it centralizes power, always abuses that power. Every time. It's never, and I think Doug Ford in Ontario is another great example of the abuse of power. Look what he's doing with the Greenbelt. Look at what he's done with the unions. Look at what he's constantly doing. I mean, corruption has occurred in Ontario and in the PC party specifically because of the centralization of power. And so, going back to the first principle, is Canada Nazi Germany? No. Is the centralization of power what creates Nazi Germany? Yes. And so what I'm opposed to is the centralization of power. As for my Christian values, My Christian values are that I, as an individual, need to go and take care of people individually, not that I should force the state to be more tyrannical towards its citizens and force them into doing things. The state is not the tool of Christianity.
No, but
that's abundantly clear. But I will just say this before you get in there, Dean. I mean, if you think you think corruption in the government is bad, wait until I tell you about the Catholic Church.
Oh, there's absolutely horrible corruption in the Catholic Church, for sure. There's corruption everywhere. Because the truth of the matter is there's no good guys and bad guys. We all have evil in us, and it's all of our duty to overcome that evil within us. That is the teaching of Christianity. Institutions are not our salvation.
So if that's the case, then why okay, here's the question I'll have for you. If the goal of Christianity, the stated goal of Christianity is to bring people to Christ, right? It is to get them to say the sinner's prayer. It's to get them their ticket into heaven. It's to get them under the umbrella and to spread the teachings and the ideology, and the apologetics of whatever denomination of evangelicism that you subscribe to. Outreach, missions work, it's a big deal. Don't get me wrong, I understand it all. But where I have a disconnect, and kind of I'll side with Max here and side with him because I'm agnostic as they come, because I've lived that experience, is that everything that happens in the Christian faith when it comes into politics, because Christians don't want government in their religion, neither do Muslims. But Muslims and Christians and Abrahamic faiths want to control government. They want to control government. Why, David? What is your goal? What is your express goal? Because, like the kettling of free will or democracy behind any faith, and it doesn't matter what faith it is, has always been a tool of government. I'm a huge philosophy guy, and I subscribe to a philosophy called Stoicism. And in Stoicism, they talk about, and it's not the Stoicism that Andrew Tate talks about. He's a douche.
More Marcus Aurelius kind of Epicurean.
Yeah, Epictetus and Seneca, where religion is needed by the poor, it is laughed at by the wise, effectively, and it is considered very useful for rulers. How is that any different to what you're trying to accomplish?
Well, okay, so there's a distinction between the institution. So Dostoevsky wrote a book called The Brothers Karamazov, and in it he has a passage called The Grand Inquisitor. Yep. And it is a Catholic bishop, or it's not the Pope, but it's some high-level Catholic. Basically, Jesus comes back, and this guy begins kind of puts him on the stand, puts him on trial, and basically says, we don't need you, Jesus, because we have these institutions. Now, the institutions of Christianity are what you're describing, but the truth of Christianity is very simple, right? And the truth of Christianity is this: we're all sinners, and we need a savior. We all know we're sinners. We all know the evil in ourselves. If you all look into yourself, you'll know that it's there. And that is a very different message from what you're describing of the proselytization or the evangelicalism of certain denominations. The core message of Christianity, Jesus sums it up in this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right now, Max would argue that truly loving your neighbor is listening to the government and doing what they tell you. I believe truly loving your neighbor is the same way that God loves us, which is giving us choice and not forcing us into any decisions. That's the difference.
So is truly loving your neighbor, in your estimation, is it, because this is something that drove me absolutely fucking crazy during the pandemic, is loving your neighbor being selfish and saying, I don't give a shit if you get vaccinated, I'm not getting vaccinated? Is that loving your neighbor? Is it telling people that, people who wear masks in a healthcare setting for the sick and immunocompromised in a hospital are losers? Is that what Christ would teach? Or would Christ teach the idea that, hey, you know what? If it's a good idea to wear a mask and you're under the rule of law, give Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to the Lord
that is a great debate. That is the great debate that has happened within the Christian church over this, and I'm glad that you brought it up.
You're welcome.
And that's very different. That's a very different argument. I would say that there are people who absolutely disagree with me on what the Christ-like thing to do is, and that's the nature of living in a democracy. We can have disagreements. I personally believe that if you look at how the teachings of Christ are laid out, that he gives us freedom to make decisions, that forcing decisions on people is not aligned with Christianity. But the thing is,
aren't you forcing faith-based politics into Alberta's constitution? Is that what you're
I'm
doing?
being accused of that, but I have no intention of forcing any faith-based things on anything. I want to take religion out of our education system, because right now we have a religious ideology that's being pushed at almost every level of whether it's our legal system, our education system, our healthcare system. Our religious ideology is being pushed. I want that to be removed. I don't want it to be replaced with Christianity, Islam, Sikhism. I just want it to be replaced with teaching children skills so that they can have a better life, not teaching them a political ideology, which is happening right now.
Max?
Well, I mean, embracing diversity is not a religion. It is an accepted practice that improves business results, makes societies more decent, and is just sort of fundamentally fair and just. It's what that guy right there called the just society. So it's not a religion. I think it's very interesting that and I do want to get into the back to the sort of Alberta politics in a second, but I think it's interesting that David brought up my favorite book of all time, which is The Brothers Karamazov. Weird for an atheist to love it, but it goes both ways. And there's a famous line in it from Ivan Karamazov, the atheist character, who says that it's not God that I reject, I just return him the ticket, which is sort of how I feel about all of that stuff. I'm also reminded of there's a famous quote from a guy named Umberto Eco, who's an Italian philosopher, who said, "People are never so completely and enthusiastically evil as when they act out of religious conviction." And I think we're seeing that right now in the Middle East. We saw that with Hamas's attack on Israel. This notion that it's governments that are the great tyrannies of history. That governments are the ones that rain sort of terror and hell on people. Religion has a much longer and much more storied track record on that front. So let's keep all religion out of schools in Alberta. Let's not pretend that diversity is a religion, but let's get it all out of there.
No, it is. It's cultural Marxism, which is a form of Gnosticism. It is absolutely a religion, and it's being pushed by our education system onto our children. There's no denying the religious nature of it, and all you really have to do to prove that is it teaches that you could be born into the wrong body. That is a religious belief. That is not a scientific belief.
Well, the religious belief, if you want to cover that off when it comes to gender studies or gender fluidity or the LGBT community in the Bible and in the Quran, the Bible says, hey, if you're gay, by the way, you're just a perversion. You're an unnatural perversion. And in the Quran, it says, if you're gay, we're going to throw you off the top of a mountain. Both Abrahamic faiths, both of those groups absolutely think being gay, trans, LGBTQ, and this is where I jump off of the bullshit. This is what I find incredibly fucking hateful, David, about that faith or any faith-based ideology. It's like, hey, not only are only us going to heaven. In the Muslim side, it's a bunch of virgins if you do a whole bunch of cool stuff. On the Christian side, it's the right hand of God. You sit at the throne of Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior, when you're gone, and you get a ticket to ride. But that ticket to ride comes with something that says, hey, the works you do here don't matter. What matters is the bridge that Christ gave you when he died for your sins, and you get to whitewash everything and go to heaven. And in that lifetime, I see so many people throwing away their experience and destroying relationships with people who are gay, lesbian, transgender, non-binary over an idea that you seem to think your faith gives you the ability to tell these people that they are an aberration. And that is frustrating for me. And it is frustrating for a lot of people that have friends who are gay, lesbian, trans, kids who are struggling trying to figure it out. And I've watched the whole Save the Children bullshit happen over the past little bit, trying to prevent, and I know this is going to happen in Alberta because it happened in Saskatchewan, trying to prevent children from having an honest conversation about what goes on in their home, no matter what happens. And it's not about pronouns. You and I both know that. Let's get the Trojan horse out of the way here. This is about not wanting to teach kids or open up them to the idea, in my mind, and I want your thoughts on this. In my mind, this is about you. This is about Christians. This is about Muslims that share that idea that being gay is some kind of sin. And you don't want your kids exposed to that sin at an early age, or at least to understand it or ask any questions. And you certainly, this is again my opinion, you certainly do not want one of your children coming from one of those homes going into school saying, my dad wants to kick me out because I told him last night that I like guys. Where am I at? Am I on the ball here? Am I off the ball here? Explain that to me, because That frustrates me. It frustrates a lot of people. And you,
I think that's that is a perversion of the Christian teaching, in the sense that it's too focused on.
Well, how do Christians feel about being gay?
It's too focused on. Let me answer the question.
Sure.
It's too focused on one sin, right? The idea within Christianity is that we're all sinners. But as to your point of Jesus just being the bridge and it's easy and you can do whatever you want in life, Paul is very clear in Romans, shall we go on sinning that grace might increase? Certainly not. So there's not a free pass to sin. That's not Orthodox Christian teaching. But going back to what you're saying.
Do you believe gay people are an aberration?
No, I think people are born with homosexual attraction, 100%. I think that happens. I think for myself, I'm born and I was born and I'm attracted to women. And I think that I'm attracted to lots and I'm attracted to lots of women, right? But I have one wife, and it's my religious belief that I must be faithful to my wife. And that is my belief. My Christianity restricts, in that sense, what I'm able to be free to do. I can do whatever I want, but I'm being told the law has required of me to do this, right? The natural law.
Do you believe that a husband is the head of the house?
I don't really. I mean, the Bible says that. I don't really care one way or the other. I think that that's an overstated position. I think if the husband's the head, the woman's the neck. Right. I think if you look at how Christian relationships tend to go, in my experience, a man is nothing without his wife. And my wife is a huge, huge help to me, and honestly a better person than I am. But but she tells me I'm far too mean to Max on Twitter, by the way. So.
Well, as you should. What do you want to do with Alberta? You've effectively, and if a lot of people are just joining us, David Parker, he's the Chief Executive Officer of Take Back Alberta, or the Executive Director, pardon me, Take Back Alberta. You are largely responsible, you and your organization, for getting Jason Kenney out of the Premier's office and installing Danielle Smith into the Premier's office, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
That was you? You did that?
Well, I wouldn't say it was only me. There was a lot of people involved, but we played a role in it for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So that is how you kind of came to the forefront in my mind. That's when I started to see you. I started watching you and Max go back and forth at each other. Max has a bunch of questions about your intentions, but I want to know what you want to do with the province of Alberta. Do you want to secede?
I don't think Albertans want to secede. I would love for us to make our own country, but I just don't think that that's why I'm not part of the Alberta Prosperity Project, which that's their goal. Their goal is to separate. I have my own organization because our goal is not separation. That's not Take Back Alberta's goal. Ours is to get as much democracy as we can. Like, people like Max and others have accused me of being radical because I'm telling people to go vote in elections. I think that's pretty pathetic, really, because that's all I actually do is run around telling people the reason that the world is the way that it is right now and the reason these policies are being pushed that you don't want is because you're not involved. And my goal for Alberta is that it becomes an example for the rest of the world on what a real democracy looks like, and that's high participation. I would like to see 50 to 60% voter turnout for school board elections. If we saw that, I think we'd have a better education system. I would like to see 75, 80% turnout for our provincial elections. I think if more people got out and voted, I think we'd have better results. But more importantly than the provincial or even the school board is that people just get involved in their communities. We have a horrible, horrible disease that's festering across this country of apathy. There is so much apathy towards our politics, whether it's on the right or the left. People are just not showing up. Ontario had 41% voter turnout in your provincial election.
Shit. Yeah,
like it's pathetic. Yeah. And that's why Doug Ford was able to win, because people just couldn't be bothered to care. And I think that that is my goal, is to make democracy flourish in Alberta. I feel like here's an example of how that's actually happening. Never before, as far as I'm aware, in Canadian history, have there been multiple debates for a board election of a party. Right now, every person running for the board has given at least 12 speeches. There's been 3 sanctioned party CA level debates for the board. That's democracy. That's people hearing the candidates and actually getting involved. That's beautiful to me. That's my goal, is that more and more people get involved in their politics and their democracy. And I think if regular people are involved, Max Fawcett's quote unquote experts are going to be exposed for what they really are, which is just people who want to control others.
Well, there we go. There we go. Yeah. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, look, I don't think that David is a radical because he wants to have more people turn out to elections. I think that's fantastic. I think having 75, 80% turnout in all of our elections would be amazing. And guess what? Progressives would win almost every election because of it.
Not a chance.
Yeah, well, go correlate turnout with progressive support, and you'll see that it does pretty well. But the reason why I call David a radical, or why I think he's a radical, is because of what he just said there about experts. I want to read you a tweet of his recently. He said, "The beauty of the new right is that we don't care about your credentials, we mock them. They are given to you by corrupt little propaganda machines. They mean nothing and we don't respect them. Your experts are just shills for the current thing." We live in a society, we use technology that we don't understand. We benefit from Amazon bringing us packages every day that we couldn't do ourselves. We stand on the shoulders of so many experts. And to then just be so dismissive of the things they do and the ways in which experts, doctors, lawyers, engineers, you name it, make our quality of life better, to me is very radical.
I would love it if the people that Max is talking about were doctors and lawyers and engineers, but they're not. The people that he's listening to are unqualified bureaucrats who've been credentialed at universities that are just pumping them through with no real expertise in anything. They're just making decisions based on.
Well, let's talk about that. Do you believe a professor, because you went after Harvard, you said Harvard's no longer an institution you basically give a shit about because it's all about teaching kids to be woke. You paint with big wide brushes and you leave a whole bunch left to the imagination, which is easily digestible by, pardon my French, hillbillies. So in my understanding of who buys the idea that you're selling, which is what Max is saying here, who buys the idea that people with credentials don't matter, people with degrees don't matter because they're all in on it? That's the tenor of that tweet, David.
Yeah, and obviously it's intentionally provocative, and it got the result that I was hoping that it would get.
Good one.
So, I'm very happy with the results that I'm getting off of those statements. But what I will say is this, and I'll just be very clear. I don't believe that our modern academic institutions are creating experts. I believe that they're creating ideologues. I think there is a ton of evidence for that. Just look at the fact that so many of these organizations are giving unequivocal support.
Isn't that what you are, though?
You're
not an academic. I'm not an academic. Aren't you an ideologue? Aren't you a creation of that ecosystem?
Well, there's definitely nobody that I'm aware of in Alberta that knows our political system better than I do. So
no, but you campaign on ideas. You campaign on ideology. You are pushing an ideology through, which is
Well, what's that idea? What ideology am I pushing?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. It's heavily influenced by religion. Well,
democracy.
It's your interpretation of democracy, right?
No, it's not. It's people should just get involved. That's what I'm pushing. That's what. If you go to my meetings, if you listen to the speeches, it's all about. It's saying, hey, you want to know why things are the way they are? It's your fault. It's your fault.
I'm curious about David's approach to democracy, because we have an exercise in democracy happening right now in Alberta with our Alberta Pension Plan stuff, where the government has put out a report that any number of people who are experts on this stuff, who can do the math, who can do the numbers, have said is laughable nonsense. The province's report says that Alberta is entitled to 53% of the Canada Pension Plan's assets. The government of Alberta's own work 4 years ago said it was less than 20%. The Fraser Institute, which is not exactly some woke bastion of sort of Laurentian elitism, they said it was 17 to 18% that we're entitled to. The provincial government's saying 53%, and now they're going out and consulting with Albertans on the basis of that absolute rank bullshit. Is that democracy? Going out and consulting with people based on a lie? And if the Trudeau government was doing it, how would you react?
That was a Marno Chappelle report. So
paid for by the government.
Sure,
touted by the government.
But I mean, I don't think of Marneau necessarily as this great conservative, propaganda machine. Maybe you do, but I think that Marneau Chappelle is very well respected, and they built that case based on the contractual agreement between the provinces and CPP. So you can argue with the contract if you want, but the contract's very clear, and if you look at the contract, that is the amount that is owed. But the question here is it democratic to have a discussion about a pension plan? Absolutely, it's democratic. And I do believe, and we'll work to make it so, that we will be leaving the Canadian pension plan and having our own Alberta pension plan. Quebec has their own. They haven't suffered in the way that, that the fear mongers like yourself are claiming that they have. They have a great pension plan. They're very happy with it.
Do you know how many businesses moved out of Quebec?
Oh, I do. Yes, I do. And that had a lot more to do with language laws than it did about the pension plan. But the point I think that you're trying to make, although it seems very obscured by your ideology, is that we shouldn't be asking people about their own pensions. And I think that is ridiculous. Why wouldn't we ask Albertans? Yes, I do think that's incredibly democratic to ask Albertans whether or not they want control of their own pension or not. And I think that's exactly
when you did ask Albertans, like when Danielle Smith did the whole hey, town hall, like she's like, I want your feedback. There was no way people could give feedback in the link. There was no way people could actually write in and tell people how they felt. They've had several polls. Alberta has largely said, no, we want to stay in the CPP. And that would, to Max's point, that is highly undemocratic to continue to push that down the road.
How is it highly undemocratic to ask people what they want?
Well, because you've asked people what they want and taken away their ability to actually respond to what the question is, and you've also decided to go forward with it. And Danielle Smith's government and hey, listen, you're all aboard, has said that you deserve 53% of Canada's CPP, and that should go to you. That is a lie. It's not a contract. That's just a lie.
And no, actually, if you look at the contract with CPP, if you look at how much Alberta has put into CPP as opposed to how much we've received, that mathematically makes sense. You can argue that that's not like.
No, there's been several reports that have dismissed that as just like
of course
fucking hilarious.
The CPP has hired every single GR firm in the entire country to fight this because they're terrified of what will happen if they lose Alberta. Because Alberta pays $3 to $5 billion more a year into CPP than we get back. That's just a fact.
Max,
so did the CPP hire the Fraser Institute back in 2018 for their numbers? Because I really don't think that the CPP was getting them to do their analysis. Trevor Toome was not hired by the CPP. Trevor Toome is an academic who does his work based on the facts. And they've all said that these numbers they're nonsense. They don't make any sense. More to the point, even if you accept the numbers, putting out a survey where you don't give people the opportunity to say no to the idea in question, where it's only, would you like your cake and do you want to eat it too? That's not a real consultation. That's not real democracy, David. If you go into the ballot box and there's only one box that you can mark on your ballot, that isn't democracy. And you know that this is what
we both know there will be.
They're trying to
the ballot box right now. Nobody's
trying to manufacture consent for an idea that they know has no support. Even Rick Bell came out today in 2 consecutive columns now and bashed the shit out of it because it's so dishonest. And there's one thing you say about Rick Bell: he does not tolerate dishonesty on anyone's part. So you're welcome to continue trying to push this turd down the track, but I think it's just going to be a bunch of streaks there for you.
Oh, I've had people tell me that we weren't going to win elections many times. In fact, just in May, I think you were crowing around about how the NDP were going to win. So I'm not worried about my ability to win elections. I'm very confident in that.
That is clear. I just want to make one quick point about, Quebec does it, so we should be able to do it too. This is sort of a running theme within the UCP right now, and the pro-separatist and firewall stuff. Quebec, the case de dépôt et placement has as its sort of strategy investing in Quebec businesses to prop them up, to support them. Now, this is a big concern for people about an Alberta pension plan because, of course, what if they invest in the oil and gas industry to prop it up and it goes tits up? That would not be great. Just today, there was news in the Globe and Mail that a big investment in a train maker that bought out Bombardier's business, the case was a big shareholder in it. It has suffered the largest single-day drop of any listing on the Paris Stock Exchange in 6 years. Now, this is because the case invested in this company because it was a Quebec business, and Quebecers have lost, I think, $4 billion on this investment so far. just because Quebec does something doesn't mean it's good. And I used to remember Alberta and Albertans not taking this sort of Quebec fetish at such face value. Quebec's embrace of separatism drove thousands of jobs out of the province. It drove billions of dollars in investment out. Why in the world would we want to try to recreate that in Alberta in 2023, right as the oil and gas industry is starting to phase out and being transitioned? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, that's a false belief that you have. We're going to have oil and gas for a very long time going into the future. But the truth of the matter is, the reason that Alberta has to pursue this path is because we've been abused by Confederation for the last 50 years. We've paid $600 billion more into Confederation than we've gotten out of it. And we are tired of being abused. We're tired of paying $3 to $5 billion more in CPP than we receive back in benefits. We're tired of equalization. In fact, 64% of Albertans, I believe it was somewhere in the 60s, voted to renegotiate equalization, and Jason Kenney did nothing about that. That was part of his downfall, but also nothing's being done about it right now. More needs to be done on that, but the truth of the matter is Albertans do realize that they're being abused by Confederation. They do realize something has to be done about it. One of the points of leverage that we have that must be used is CPP, because without Alberta, Canadian Pension Plan is not it's not going to work. It isn't functional because we prop it up with paying more than we receive out of it. The truth of the matter is the vast majority of Albertans, and once they are educated on the fact that they will get more out of their pension than they would if it remained in CPP, which is just a fact, that we will not have to pay nearly as much, which is just a fact. When the lies of the NDP and people like yourselves are proven to be false, we will see that that Albertans are going to love this. And I'm going to work very hard, and as I do with grassroots campaigning, to educate people on the truth and to expose the lies of the socialist weasels who want to keep the centralization of power going.
Okay, Max, comment on being a socialist weasel and the facts that David Parker just dropped. He said they're facts. Okay, go ahead.
I mean, he could have chosen a worse animal than a weasel. They're very crafty. I'm certainly not a socialist, as much as he and other people like to pretend otherwise, but that's just more name calling. The facts are the ones that the Alberta government is trying to shove down our throats, like fattening up a pheasant so you can make foie gras out of its liver. Like they're spending millions of dollars advertising everywhere. Every YouTube video, everything that you pull up right now has Alberta Pension Plan propaganda around it, and that's just what it is. You look at Trevor Toombs' paper that he just filed. It's a peer-reviewed paper. Everyone can go read it. It's pretty academic. It's pretty wonkish, but he puts the numbers out and says, actually, it's more likely if we use realistic numbers for the amount of money that we would get transferred, it would be probably maybe 1% less in contribution rates, maybe, than the CPP right now. And that's with much greater risks down the road of having a smaller fund, it being more buffeted by, global markets and whatnot. And really, so, it would be a slight benefit for a much bigger risk down the road than the CPP. That's a conversation that I think Albertans should have. I think that's a great conversation. I think the government should be informing people properly about the risks and the potential rewards, rather than just saying, hey, you can have your cake and eat it too, and no, you won't get fat. And that would be democracy, is making sure that both sides are on a level playing field, that we're using actual facts, that both sides of the conversation have the same amount of funding, and then let's see where the chips fall. But this is really about, I'm not sure if it's just about having this go badly so that he can keep people angry, so that the UCP can keep people angry at Ottawa. This notion that we're abused by Ottawa. We pay the same federal tax rate as every other Canadian. We are not abused. The only reason why we have higher incomes here and therefore pay more taxes is because we're lucky enough to have oil and gas under our feet. That is not through any virtue of our own sort of entrepreneurship. It is a benefit of circumstance and location. And the idea that the federal government is sort of out to punish Albertans. I mean, look, I've gone chapter and verse on this for the last few years. The facts are out there for people. But if they want to feel like victims, if they want to be the big babies and fill their diapers over this stuff, there's nothing I can do or any facts can do to stop them. If that's the identity that they want to cultivate for themselves as victims, well, fill your boots. It's a weird choice to make, especially when you're the wealthiest province in the country. And there's lots of good things we could be doing to embrace the future. But some people really hold on to that victimhood as kind of a foundational aspect of who they are. And that's sort of a look in the mirror kind of moment.
Well, you'll notice that Max didn't address any of the actual facts that I presented. He didn't address the fact that we do pay more into CPP than we receive back, to the order of $3 to $4 billion every year. That's just a fact. He didn't even address it because he can't address facts. He just has to make up these academic arguments in order to bolster his false belief that Alberta hasn't been abused.
May I, Dean?
Yeah, Max, go ahead.
We pay more. It's not the province that pays more. Albertans pay more than they get back because Albertans tend to retire to other parts of the country, and Albertans have a younger population than the rest of the country. People come here to work. People come here to, make their fortunes, work in the oil and gas industry. It's why I came here to work. But that is not some sort of virtue of Alberta. It's not like, Ottawa is screwing us by letting us have a younger population. We benefit from having a younger population. We benefit from having people come from the Maritimes, come from BC to work here, and then go back to where they live, where they collect their benefits. That's why that number is the way it is because people come here to work and then they go somewhere else to retire or go back to where they came from. If we had a proper accounting of that, and frankly, it's on the federal government that they don't have this in hand, I think we would have a better conversation around this and a better understanding of what's really going on.
Well, actually, I have to disagree with you in saying that hard work is not a value, but I think if you look at the productivity of all the provinces, Alberta is vastly ahead of everyone else. We do like work here in Alberta. We love to work hard, and it's part of our culture and our identity. And as you pointed out, that's why you moved here, because that is who we are here, and that's what we do. And I also completely disagree with your claim that the oil and gas is just lying there under our feet and it took no innovation or entrepreneurship to bring it out. I think it took a lot of technology. It took a lot of innovation. It took a lot of entrepreneurship to create the amazing economy we have around oil and gas. So I couldn't disagree with you more that it has nothing to do with who we are. I think it has everything to do with who Albertans are, that we are paying more, because that's the culture here. The culture in other parts of the country is definitely not hardworking. In fact, it's very much put out your hand and hope people will put something in.
It's a very big, vague generalization you make there, Mr. Parker.
Which one?
The one where like the rest of the country's lazy as fuck? That one.
Well, look at the productivity stats, right? Just look at the productivity stats. Yeah,
but productivity stats exist today because of what we just went through with the pandemic, and everybody's on CERB, and I don't want to get into the CERB discussion in this conversation. And we are legitimately in this turnstile moment, the bell curve of society where everybody's kind of fucking losing their minds trying to figure it out. There are a bunch of reasons why people work from home, productivity is low. People couldn't go to work, people getting locked down, which I also didn't agree with. Productivity is low. There are a million factors. And again, painting with a big brush, I find to be quite disingenuous. But in the big scheme of things, what I find also incredibly interesting is how you have an entire province and an entire country rallying around something that no one gave a shit about until about 2 months ago, right? Nobody gave a shit about it. Danielle Smith didn't campaign on the APP. She didn't campaign, didn't say a word about it. It was just like, hey, look what I got this thing. Let's do it. And now all of a sudden, everybody's magically interested and incredibly proud of their pension, and then incredibly pissed off that Alberta doesn't have their own. Dude, you and I both know this is a bit of a red herring and a way to stick it in the eye of Ottawa, is it not?
Yes, this is a way of sending a message to Ottawa, a very clear message that we will not be abused anymore. We won't be abused anymore.
It's PR. I know, but everything, like it seems like every single policy that comes out of Alberta is directed at showing the people of Alberta, you hate Justin Trudeau and you hate Ottawa. That's what the CPP thing is. I mean, listen, the whole subject is boring as fuck, right? I mean, true. We're sitting around here talking about it like it's ours and it's yours and it's his and it's mine. You're talking about tax dollars and how unfair tax dollars are. No one gives a shit about tax dollars. Nobody. You rally around tax dollars and you rally around the narrative of CPP and APP thing so that you can legitimately take a flaming bag of shit and put it on the Prime Minister's doorstep and every single doorstep of every government official that stands in contrast to what you're trying to accomplish in Alberta. Is that not accurate?
No, I really do believe what I've said, which is that the government of this country has abused Alberta, and most Albertans, the vast majority of Albertans, agree with me. The vast majority. They don't. Whether they do. Look at the equalization referendum. That's all the evidence you need.
That wasn't a referendum on whether we're abused children of Confederation.
Yeah, it was.
No, it wasn't. Can we just put a pin in this for a sec, Dean?
Yeah,
This notion that we're abused by the federal government. First of all, it's an insult to people who actually have been abused by, say, the Catholic Church. What the federal government has done, for example, is help build the oil sands sector that Albertans are so proud of, and which is benefiting us so handsomely and has for so many years. That the Syncrude partnership, one of the first oil sands facilities, one of the ones that proved out that the technology could work. Syncrude, the American partner, private sector partner in that consortium, backed out in 1974. They said, it doesn't make sense. This is never going to fly. This dog won't hunt. And who came and saved Alberta's ass? Ontario, the government of Ontario, the government, and the government of Ottawa, federal government led by Pierre Trudeau and Jean Chrétien. So this whole notion that we're like these abused children and the federal government is just ruining our oil and gas sector. They were there at the beginning to help make it go. They helped prove it up. And if they weren't there, it wouldn't be here today. Second thing, in the 1990s, when Jean Chrétien was the prime minister, he came in and he changed the depreciation rules around how oil sands facilities were built. And right after that, you saw a huge explosion in oil sands construction. Why? Because the depreciation rules made the numbers work for these companies. So don't give me this nonsense about how the federal government is out here abusing Alberta. The federal government has in many cases, and ironically, it's always the Liberal governments, has in many cases helped the oil sands and helped the energy sector get to where it is today. And as my final piece of evidence, I'll give you the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Would not exist were it not for the current federal government. The BC government was filibustering it into the ground. Kinder Morgan would have walked away. The feds came in. They repaired the consultation that the Harper government did and fucked up. They got the consultation done properly. They reapproved the project, and it's about to be completed. No political win there for Trudeau. He's eaten his balls in BC because of this. There was no political win for him in this, but he did it because it was for the good of the country. So please, we're not abused.
Well, these are wild, but I'll let Albertans decide whether they think that they're abused or not based on the facts, not Max Fawcett saying things. But actually, it was Eric Newell and his oil sands task force that forced the Liberal government to push through on these things, not some Liberal thought up idea that they came in and said, we'll help you out here. And Eric is a great Albertan hero and did a lot of work and a lot of consultation and bringing a lot of people together on collaboration on that. And I will agree with you. I give kudos to Jean Chrétien. We're not dealing with the Jean Chrétien Liberals. We're dealing with a woke ideologue, Justin Trudeau, who you were a staffer in his government, so you're not exactly unbiased on these things.
Nope.
But the truth of the matter is,
nope, wrong government.
No, you didn't. You weren't a government guy.
I was a Jean Chrétien loyalist. I fought against the Paul Martin people. I was a staffer in his government. I was not a staffer for Justin Trudeau.
Okay, fair enough. I stand corrected. But you were a Liberal staffer. But the point of the matter is that if we actually look at the fact of how Alberta has been treated, and you go out and you talk to regular Albertans, you'll see that absolutely they all know the abuse that we've suffered. So if
they get told the abuse they've suffered, dude. Like, listen, you and I both understand the value of media, right? And I know the media in Alberta is very different than the media in Ontario, very different than the media in Saskatchewan. And listen, you and I both know you're force-fed whatever the industry that rides for the brand in that province, and in this case, oil and gas, everything rallies around that. And my question to you is this. How does Take Back Alberta get its funding? Is it through oil and gas lobby groups?
Grassroots, actually.
Yeah, but who are the people when you say grassroots? Is it donations from
most of it's like $15 a person at meetings, and then we also have we have online people donate there, but it's
but you've got the juice of lobby groups behind you, and the lobby groups for oil and gas are very much
actually we were too extreme. They're afraid of donating to us because
really?
No, it's a grassroots funded organization.
Do you take any foreign money?
No foreign money.
None.
Zero. All Albertans, pretty much. Like I'm not. There might be a few people in British Columbia and Ontario. I'm unaware of them, though. Yeah.
Okay. And you're well funded by the citizens of Alberta, and you
not terribly well funded. I would say we do all right. We can keep the lights on, but we could always use more. But we're not.
Couldn't we all?
Here's what I'll say to that point about the oil and gas industry. You're absolutely right. They have a huge voice in Alberta because they brought a lot of the prosperity that Albertans enjoy to Alberta, and I think they've kind of earned that. But here's the bigger problem in my mind: the big oil and gas companies, like the really big ones, are trying to do what AHS does. Right? They're trying to centralize their power, centralize their control. I would love to see more small to medium-sized enterprises and far less centralization of business power around the CNRLs and the bigger companies, because I again believe that that's ultimately the evil. So I do think that some of the very large oil and gas companies in Alberta have way too much power and influence. And if you look at Twitter, even Brett Wilson goes after Take Back Alberta. So it's not as if we are fans of big business in that sense. I'm not a fan of oligopolies or monopolies. I'm a true free market capitalist, and in my values on economics and my values on politics.
Well, I can tell you this: is the money's got to come from somewhere to do what you've done, sir. Like, money has to come from somewhere, and what you've done has been pretty spectacular in a very short period of time.
Oh,
And grassroots, if you agree with it or not, and nothing catches fire that quick. You don't attain the kind of power, you don't consolidate the kind of influence you consolidate on $15 from a couple of Albertans. You just don't. So,
it's not a couple. There's a lot of them.
Like how many?
We have 36,000 people in our organization.
You have 36,000 and people from Alberta that want the same thing that you want, that believe the same things that you believe. So
far, it'll keep growing.
All right. I find that fascinating, though, because like you and I both kind of understand how this business works. We understand where stuff comes from in terms of being able to get something done. There's an old saying: it's no money, no honey, right? Like, you've got the ability to do some things in that province that not many people have done. But you've also come up against it in the last little bit in terms of, the reputational damage, I think, across the country. Are you misrepresented because we're asking you some tough questions? Are you misrepresented by the people that are reporting on you? What are you? I guess that's the question. Like, what is it that you want Alberta to look like at the end of the day if David Parker and Take Back Alberta get their hands on the province, full stop?
It's already happening, right? I described what I want, and what is happening is that people are getting involved at a level they never have before in Canadian history. The fact that we're having debates, and Max probably has to admit this, I don't think there's ever been, as far as I'm aware of, multiple cross-province debates for a board election for any party in the history of this country. It's never happened. It's happening now. And that's because people are getting involved. What I want to see is higher voter turnouts. I want to see regular common sense values back in our system, not this woke garbage that seems to be taking.
What is woke? Explain that to me. What is your woke garbage? What is that?
I think that this critical race theory, total garbage. Teaching children that they're racist, total garbage. I think that teaching or confusing children and claiming that they might have been born in the wrong body, total garbage. I think that those kind of things, along with this settler notion. So what we're seeing come out of the Hamas-Israel conflict, this idea that people are settlers and that there's the indigenous and the settlers and dividing us, this constant identity politics where we take people and we divide them into smaller and smaller little fractional victimized groups. It's funny, the iron law of woke projection never misses, as James Lindsay says, and Max Fawcett has just proved it by projecting that I'm trying to divide people when the entire ideology that he supports is all about dividing people into smaller.
But aren't you? Isn't
categories.
that what you did? Didn't you divide the UCP party into two groups? Take Back Alberta hardliners and then the UCP. Isn't that what you just described? Creating a small group of people that
I think we're the vast majority of the UCP, and I think we're about to prove it at the annual general meeting.
I mean, in fairness, I never said that you were dividing people. I said that, you are a purveyor of sort of far right politics, but that's not you dividing people. You are clearly uniting people behind you. And I will say, like, to David's credit, he has made his plans very clear. He has shown his hand at the table before anyone else even got their cards, which is he wants to take over the school boards. He wants to take over the municipal elections. And it's incumbent upon Progressive to show up. Because if they don't show up, David will. You know that for a fact. But I think in terms of talking about the iron law of what was it? The iron law of projection?
Of woke projection.
Woke
yes.
projection.
Woke
Okay.
projection.
Right. Sorry, I'm not familiar with that iron law. But he talked about, or you talked about him talking about how it's all about being a victim. Isn't that exactly what the whole culture of sort of conservatives in Alberta is about? They love to be victims. They revel in their victimhood. They create panels to celebrate their victimhood. The whole culture is about getting screwed over by somebody else and being weak.
Yeah,
and
isn't
being
that your
victim.
platform? Isn't that your platform from Alberta? Like we got shafted by Ottawa again. We get
Well,
shafted. Isn't that whole
the
isn't the whole
question is,
platform a victim?
Are we
platform?
victims or not?
No,
Right?
That's
If
what
we
that's what
are,
I'm asking. And you
right,
say
if-
yes, Max says no, and then like
Yeah.
5 minutes ago you're like
No, yeah. So let me
ideology, and that's your whole
speak
platform.
to that. Let me
Okay.
speak to that.
All right.
Actually, my whole platform has nothing to do with the Alberta Pension Plan. I'm not like, yes, I'm pushing it. I care about it. But what my platform has to do with is saying, hey, you're not a victim. You're literally a citizen that needs to get involved in their democracy. You can watch my videos. You can watch my podcasts. That's my message. It's always been my message.
No offense, but
However-
you literally have
however-
been repeating the same thing about how Alberta is continually
However,
shafted and we're a
let me
province
say,
of victims.
we are. That's a fact. We
Okay.
have been victimized.
All right.
It's like saying that if someone's raped, they're not a victim. Like we shouldn't let them. We shouldn't let them say that, right? No, absolutely. If something bad and horrible happens to someone, we
It's
shouldn't
a false
say,
equivalence that comes
No,
with some pretty
I don't think
serious
it is.
grossness, but whatever.
I don't think it is a false.
All right.
equivalence.
So you think
Um,
Alberta is being raped by the federal government?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Example?
Equalization and CPP and the attacks on our number one industry by the Impact Assessment Act.
David, what do you imagine happens if we eliminate equalization tomorrow? Do Albertans pay less in federal income tax?
That would be up to Albertans.
No, they don't. They pay the exact same in federal income tax. If we got rid of equalization, we still pay the same rate, which is the same as every other Canadian.
No, I realize that we pay the same rate, but the money that's going into equalization is not coming from income tax.
Yes, it is.
No,
it does
it's
not. It does not come from Alberta. It comes from federal taxes.
It comes from federal taxes that are then redistributed based on essentially a communist system, where it says take from those who have and give to those.
You're going to have to get more specific than communist system.
Okay. They take from the
Thank
people
you.
who have
Yeah.
and they give to the people who don't. That's
They're
communism.
not taking from the people who have. They're making everyone pay the same income
Taxation
tax rate.
is taking. It is taking.
Is taxation theft? Perhaps.
Absolutely.
There we go.
I happen to agree with that.
Yeah, thank you.
I agree with it just based in pure resentment when I see the taxes come off of anything that I get. But and Canada is heavily taxed, and then now we're going to
Way
get into
too
a
heavily
conversation.
taxed.
Yeah, I get it, but really appreciate being over the fact that on Friday I get to go for a colonoscopy for free. Really appreciate the idea that my doctor will see me tomorrow if I need that. Really appreciate the idea that I have very few toll roads in my future today. Really appreciate the idea that other people who are less fortunate than me, and this is again where we diverge, David, I would give part of my paycheck to help other
Then
people
give it,
who are in need.
but don't take part of mine.
Well, exactly. Then we get back to the selfish bit that Max was at, and we've got a receipt here, David. That's what we got.
Well,
You
the
got-
truth of the matter is that if your threat to me is I'm taking your stuff and giving it to whoever I want, and if you don't give it to me, I'm going to do violence to you, which is what the state is doing. It's saying I'm going to take your stuff whether you like it or not, and if you don't give it to me, then I will do violence to you by putting you
What
in prison
violence?
or something.
What
Well,
violence?
Well, if you don't pay your taxes, things don't go well for you. The law comes down on you. That
In
is the threat
Canada,
of
all you
violence.
have to do is declare bankruptcy, and you're good, dude. It's not. It's
No,
very
I don't
different.
think. Can you get rid of your CRA
Yeah.
debts through bankruptcy?
100%.
I'm pretty sure you can, but
No, you can't.
that's another point.
No, you can. You can.
The point that I'm trying to make is that the government has a monopoly on violence, right? That's kind of what the whole idea of a state is. We shouldn't allow people to do violence except for the government. That's the social contract. But that also means that they can do violence to us if we don't obey their whatever draconian measure they decide to do, like say tell you can't go to your kid's hockey game unless you take a experimental medical drug. Right? Like the truth of the matter is that they do have a monopoly on violence, and the taxation is literally saying, give me your money or we will do violence to you through the legal system.
The only violence I saw during that whole pandemic bullshit was people camping out on Bank Street and holding a bunch of people downtown Ottawa hostage for 3 weeks. That was the only violence I saw in terms of the government feeding it to people. I know. I've got a few receipts that says it was, as does the rest of the world. But bottom line is that, I'm having a hard time qualifying, the government delivering violence on its republic and the citizens of this country that you say exists when it comes to the subject we're talking about.
Do you disagree that the government has a monopoly on violence?
100%. 100% disagree. The government does not have a monopoly on violence. I would say that our institutions and the way that life has worked, if you want to go back in terms of brown shirts, you want to go back in terms what we're talking about, the police state, we want to talk about why the police state exists. That's a whole other conversation.
That's true. That is another conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But and again, painting with that big brush, you got to get into the minutia of the conversation to be able to have that accurate assessment of what's going on in front of us. And for you to say the government delivers violence for people that don't want to get vaccinated,
no, I didn't.
Hockey games.
It does. It does. It did. It literally.
There's no violence. There's no violence. You just weren't allowed to go in and watch a hockey game.
In Calgary, a guy was out without a mask on just a regular old outdoor rink, and he was arrested violently by police officers. That's violence.
Oh yeah, I saw that. That was actually pretty funny. I thought
that's
that was
violence.
Funny. Well, and you're going to get that everywhere. How many?
That's what I'm saying. That's we obviously have a philosophic difference. Yeah, we obviously have a philosophic difference, but I don't think that it can be argued, at least in good faith and logically, that the government doesn't have a monopoly on violence, because the government can do violence to citizens, but nobody else can do violence.
I think I just effectively did argue against it. Actually,
I understand you did. I agree with your argument.
Can we just talk very quickly before I think we have to wrap soon? But about the fact that in terms of equalization, Alberta has equalization within its own borders. Ontario has equalization within its own borders. Calgary has equalization within its own borders. Governments redistribute wealth all the time between parts of their jurisdiction that are prosperous and parts of their jurisdiction that are less prosperous. And if they didn't do that, things would be a whole heck of a lot worse. So the thing that I find frustrating about the equalization conversation, it's the exact same thing I find frustrating about the pension conversation, is that we're not actually talking about the thing as it is. We're talking about the thing as conservatives want people to imagine it as. And again, with the equalization program, this whole we're going to renegotiate it. You could eliminate equalization tomorrow. Nothing changes for Albertans. Not a goddamn thing.
Well, your rhetoric is good, but your reality is false.
Well, we'll see that bear out, I guess, depending on what happens in Alberta, David. Listen, I appreciate both of you guys taking time to go toe to toe here. It was entertaining. There was some sweet name calling. There was some
but we had to do a little bit. Yeah, but you got to give the people what they want.
Yeah, you do. Well, you know how this works, right? But at the very least, I found, and I final tally 8 things we agreed on today. 8 things, and I didn't even include beards and facial hair. But listen, there are a couple of things, David, that you said that I would agree with. By and large, I'm really grateful that you gave us some time today to kind of explain to you, even though I completely disagree with a lot of the things you said, at least we had a conversation. Because listen, we run around cutting people's legs off, kneecapping each other, trying to insult and insinuate that the reputation of the individual who we disagree with is somehow impugned. And these are not good people, and you shouldn't listen to them. And I watch people do that to you. I watch people do that to Max. I watch people do that to me. It's, again, another commonality. But being able to have this discussion with receipts, to have these conversations, drags a whole bunch of stuff out into the light. And I would agree with you on one principle and one principle alone, that we need first principles to, when we're talking about shaking up how governments across this country have kettled individuals, minds, people, institutions. I completely understand that thinking. And I think that the Liberal Party needs a wake-up call. I think conservatives need a wake-up call. Really glad to hear that you think Doug Ford is a piece of shit. I think we've got another couple of podcasts in.
Absolutely.
You're not riding for conservatives, right? You're a conservative who's riding for what I think is crazy, but you're riding for the same people who believe the same things you do, right? It's not about standing up for conservatives or being a conservative cudgel, right? You're This is a first principle thing, and you're way on the other side of the spectrum to Max and myself to a lesser extent. And I think, Max, there's something here when it comes to, hey, listen, you can call this cat crazy, which I probably will when we're done this podcast, but at least he had the nuts to sit here and have a conversation with us, kind of go over the sniping and calmly sit down and say, hey, you can think I'm crazy, but this is how I feel. This is what I think. I've got 36,000 people that feel the same way. I've been strategic about trying to take over the process. I don't disagree to a much lesser extent that across the board, we should be sending a charge into political parties and how they do things, how they message, how they are accountable to people. And we all should be talking about democracy because, believe it or not, we live in a democracy, David, where you're allowed to have this conversation and no one's standing at your door outside with rifles saying, hey, you're not allowed to say that. There are a lot of countries, and we're watching it happen, wars, rumors of wars across the world where that is the case.
Well, I will say, though, we do also live in a society where people cut my brake lines because they disagree with me. So,
People cut your brake lines?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. Over the James Lindsay thing, having James Lindsay, he's so full of hate that he shouldn't even be allowed to speak. So there are problems, but I wanted to just say, Dean and Max, I really, my respect for Max has grown quite a bit through this conversation just by the fact that he was willing to have it. Because I know that there's a lot of people who are not willing to have these conversations and, shouldn't platform David Parker, the extremist. So I'm very grateful to get my voice out there. And I agree. I don't think we see eye to eye on very much, but the fact that you guys are willing to have the conversation means that maybe we're not lost as a society.
I think we just became friends, Matt.
Oh, God help us. Look, the thing I appreciate David coming on here again. This is not a home game for him, and so that takes courage. And I appreciate him pushing progressives to get off their lazy asses and start organizing because they're going to have to. I think we find with these sorts of things that when you can see people's eyes, it's a lot harder to be a heartless prick to them. And so maybe more of this and less of the Twitter stuff would be good for everyone. And certainly that's been my experience doing that podcast I had for a while there. When you talk to people you disagree with, you don't stop disagreeing, but you find out even with people you think you wouldn't have anything in common with, turns out you do.
Yeah.
True.
You're 100% right. You get FaceTime with somebody, it's a totally different game. It's easy to lob bombs on Twitter. That's what everybody does, but that's why they're stupid, right? Why we're smart. So really appreciate you guys being here. And David, thank you very much for your time. Max, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate both of you guys taking time to stop by to say hi. And let's do this again. Let's do this on a somewhat regular basis. Where
I'd be totally down.
Where things get hot and you guys want to get after each other, just do it here. This is way more fun and less combative, and you're not feeding all the trolls on either side. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Appreciate you guys. David
Thanks,
Parker, Take Back Alberta, Max Fawcett, Canada's National Observer. Really appreciate both of you guys stopping by the podcast today, as always. Brought to you by our friends at what are the name of our sponsors? There we go. I gotta fucking nail that one. Ed's Fine Imports, his Gitch. We've got underwear. He's got your underwear. Boxer briefs, pouch in the front. You can't miss with these things. Trust me. Doesn't matter if you're from Take Back Alberta. Doesn't matter if you're a screaming liberal. Doesn't matter at all. Everybody wears underwear. So do yourself a favor. Go get the underwear I wear. And the bipartisan choice of underwear across the board. Gitch, GITCH3, boxer briefs, pouch in the front, super breathable, made for everyday wear. Go to edsfineimports.com. Order today. Gitch 3 is your promo code. Buy one, buy 3. You'll get one for free. Good guy, that Ed. We'll get you some Gitch. And, of course, brought to you by our friends at Cantork out of beautiful Edmonton, Ontario. We have the ability to get you any torque wrench you need. And I say we because I am part of the Cantork team. I feel that way. They manufacture, they design, they do everything when it comes to torque wrenches. If you have a bolting solution that you can't find a solution for, loosener, fastener, you need a torque wrench that is made by the best in the business. Doesn't matter what heavy machinery, what industry you're in. Go to cantork.com. Cantork.com. You can get a nice little conversation going with Colin, and he's going to send his team to address the solution that you need when it comes to a bolting solution. If you need a torque wrench, heavy machinery, nuclear industry, railroad industry, steel industry, forestry, doesn't matter. Go to cantork.com today. Thank you all for taking time. Watch the comment section. It was on fuego today. And this is the new normal. Hopefully more people can do this instead of picking sides and deciding that they can't have a conversation. Listen, everybody's normal. Everybody's trying to drive a result. Doesn't matter who you are. And there are tools at David Parker's disposal, Max Fawcett's disposal that we use to drive narratives. Doesn't matter what that narrative is. Canada is a great country, and it was great to have both those guys on. Depending on how you feel, depending on your ideology, you enjoyed that. You enjoyed that because you had two people going at it. You had common sense in there, and I give David credit. You know, you can call him what you want. I think some of his ideas are nuts, but the dude showed up, walked into the visitors' dressing room, and had a conversation. Deserves credit for that, if nothing else. And stop cutting his brake lines. Jesus Christ, you people. Have a great day. Thanks for being here. We'll see you tomorrow, 4 o'clock. Lachlan Cross will be joining me. Mr. Lachlan Cross. He'll be back. Have a great day. We'll see you then. Bye.